It began with a flicker, a faint glimmer in the cold silence of space, something that shouldn't have been there. When astronomers first noticed it, no one paid much attention. The sky is full of wandering debris. Comets, asteroids, fragments of cosmic dust, all caught between gravity's endless tug-of-war. But this one felt different. They named it 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever recorded passing through our solar system. At first it looked ordinary, just another drifter from another star, a frozen traveler passing through our celestial neighborhood. Yet even in its stillness, there was something strange about the way it moved. Something subtle. Almost deliberate. For weeks, scientists watched it trace a slow, curved path across the black canvas of the sky. It wasn't glowing like a typical comet. Its light didn't scatter right. Its reflection wasn't random. Normally, when sunlight hits a tumbling rock, the brightness flickers chaotically, unpredictable, like the spark of a dying fire. But 3I Atlas shimmered in perfect rhythm, a pulse, a beat, as if the void itself had found a heartbeat. At first, the team at Mauna Kea Observatory thought it was just an equipment glitch, maybe a calibration error. But the data from Chile matched, and so did the readings from the Canary Islands. Different telescopes, different nights, same pattern. Every few minutes, a tiny rise in brightness. Every few minutes, a perfect return to silence. It was too precise to be random, too clean to be natural. Something inside that object was reflecting light, like it was sending a signal. Imagine staring into the endless black, seeing a tiny dot of light so far away it could fit between your fingers, and realizing that dot might be responding to you. It wasn't supposed to feel alive, but somehow it did. Astronomers began to whisper theories to each other in quiet hallways. Maybe it was rotating in a strange, geometric way. Maybe its surface was layered, metallic. Maybe it wasn't even a comet at all. But for every explanation, the data whispered back, no, that's not enough. As 3I Atlas drifted closer to the sun, it crossed the ecliptic, the invisible plane that slices through our solar system, the same path followed by all the planets. And that's when its secret deepened, because instead of brightening, as every comet does when it nears heat, 3I Atlas dimmed. It should have flared with vaporized ice and dust, scattering sunlight in a dazzling tail. Instead, it went dark, almost as if it were hiding. That's when one scientist murmured something that would echo in every lab and observatory that studied it. What if it's adjusting to the light? By now, hundreds of data logs from across the globe were being compiled. NASA, ESA, and independent observatories were all looking at the same mystery. And while the headlines called it a fascinating anomaly, those who studied the numbers felt something deeper, unease. Because the reflectivity, the way the object bounced light back into space, didn't behave like rock or ice. It behaved like metal. It behaved like design. Every pulse, every dimming interval, it all formed a pattern that defied randomness, like a whisper written in light. And yet, no one dared say what it truly felt like. Because how do you look into the face of the universe and admit that something out there might be watching you back? For decades, humanity has stared into the stars, searching for signals. We built arrays, launched satellites, and sent golden records drifting into the unknown. But what if the universe never needed our call? What if something already heard us and was simply waiting for the right moment to answer? 3I Atlas felt like that moment. small, silent, but charged with an invisible tension, like a breath held in the dark. Some scientists noticed another oddity: the object's trajectory. It wasn't chaotic, like an interstellar rock should be. It followed a remarkably stable arc through our solar system, threading perfectly between the orbits of Mars and Earth, before slingshotting toward the Sun. Almost like it knew where it was going. Gravitational coincidence, they called it. But deep down, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt chosen. Late one night, a graduate student at an observatory in Hawaii ran a time-lapse of 3I Atlas's recorded light curve, a graph that shows how its brightness changes over time. She expected to see random fluctuations, but instead she saw rhythm. Up, down, pause, repeat, over and over. Perfectly consistent. She watched it again, then again. Her voice trembled when she finally called her supervisor and said, "Sir, I think it's responding to sunlight, like it's alive." By now, the data couldn't be ignored. Every telescope that tracked 3I Atlas, from Arizona to South Africa, confirmed the same anomaly. A consistent pulse. A silent visitor, blinking in the dark. But if it was sending something, what was it trying to say? As the object drifted closer to the inner solar system, sunlight began to reveal its faint color. Not gray like rock, not white like ice, but something else. A dull bronze tone that shimmered when light hit it from certain angles, almost reflective, almost polished. Some joked that it looked like old metal. Others didn't laugh, because deep down, there's a line every scientist fears to cross. The point where observation turns into implication. Where data stops explaining and starts suggesting. And 3I Atlas had just crossed it. For centuries, humanity has stared at the stars and wondered if we are alone. But sometimes, the most terrifying answer isn't no. It's maybe. Maybe something has been traveling longer than our species has existed. Maybe it's seen 1,000 suns rise and die. Maybe it's not lost, but looking. And now, after millions of years drifting between stars, it has reached us. As it left the outer system behind and headed toward the sun, scientists prepared for its final moments. They expected it to burn out, like every comet before it, a flash of light, a burst of dust, then silence. But as 3I Atlas neared Perihelion, the closest point in its orbit, its light didn't fade, it brightened. Not from vaporization, but from reflection. Controlled, steady, almost deliberate. It was as if the object wasn't dying, it was awakening. In those final nights before it disappeared behind the glare of the sun, telescopes captured one last glimpse of the object. For a few seconds, the light flickered faster than ever before. A rapid pulse, perfectly timed, repeating like code. Then, nothing. Silence. 3I Atlas slipped behind the sun's brilliance and vanished. But the silence it left behind wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that lingers after a question. One the universe isn't ready to answer. And somewhere in that silence, humanity waited. Staring into the empty sky, wondering if a small pulsing light had just changed everything we thought we knew about what drifts between the stars. For weeks, the world waited. Eyes pointed toward the heavens, machines humming quietly beneath the cold dome of the night sky. Everyone expected the same story. A cosmic rock wandering too close to the sun, flaring in a final burst of light before fading into dust. That's what happens That's what always happens. But this time, something felt wrong, because 3I Atlas didn't follow the rules. It never did. As it neared Perihelion, that delicate moment when a comet comes closest to the sun, telescopes around the world were ready. NASA, ESA, JAXA. Even backyard astronomers stayed up through the night, hoping to witness the brief fiery death of a traveler from another star. Instead, they saw nothing. The object that should have exploded into brilliance grew darker. Its light faded slowly, steadily, until it almost vanished from view. At first, people thought the instruments were malfunctioning. Maybe solar glare had blinded the sensors. Maybe the comet had fragmented and the brightness simply dispersed. But no, the data was clean. Too clean. 3I Atlas wasn't disappearing at random. It was dimming in perfect mathematical intervals. Every few minutes, its brightness dropped by the exact same fraction, then returned, then dimmed again. Like a breath, like a pulse, like a pattern. Some called it coincidence. Others called it impossible. But deep down, every scientist who looked at the data felt it. That silent, electric tension crawling through the numbers. This wasn't chaos. This was control. Imagine standing in a dark field at night, looking up at a sky full of stars, and realizing that one of them, one tiny glimmer, is blinking at you in rhythm, not a random flicker, a message, a countdown, a signal. And suddenly, you're not just an observer anymore. You're part of something, watching you back. That's what the astronomers felt, a strange awareness, like being seen. At first, they stayed quiet. Science doesn't like whispers of mystery. It likes explanations, data, equations, logic. But how do you explain light that breathes? One team in Switzerland charted the dimming pattern, converting it into sound waves. When they played it, what came out wasn't static. It was rhythm, a steady, pulsing tone, almost musical, almost intentional. Every major observatory tried to disprove it. Maybe solar radiation was interfering with the sensors. Maybe it was just the sun's own fluctuations reflecting off the comet's surface. But none of it fit. The intervals were too precise, exact, down to the millisecond, a perfection nature doesn't usually bother with. And when multiple stations across the planet confirmed the same synchronized pattern, something unspoken began to spread. Maybe this wasn't light at all. Maybe it was language. But if it was language, who was speaking? And why now? The deeper they studied it, the stranger it became. The intervals between each dimming weren't random. They followed a recurring sequence of numbers that appeared again and again in nature. The Fibonacci sequence, the spiral that shapes galaxies, shells, hurricanes, even the structure of human DNA. It was as if the universe itself had chosen its most sacred pattern to communicate, and 3I Atlas was the messenger. But while the scientific world wrestled with disbelief, the object kept moving. Closer to the sun, closer to the point of no return. If it were an ordinary comet, this would have been its death sentence. The heat, the radiation, the violent pressure of solar winds. It should have torn apart. But it didn't. Instead, its surface temperature began to stabilize, staying within a narrow band that defied every known model. It wasn't burning, it was regulating. One astronomer described it perfectly. She said, "It's like watching a creature adjust its breathing as it walks into fire." The quote went viral for a moment before agencies rushed to contain the narrative. But the thought had already escaped into the public mind. If 3i Atlas wasn't burning, if it was regulating itself, then maybe it wasn't alive. But it also wasn't just rock and ice. It was something in between, something new. Days passed, then weeks. The world's biggest telescopes kept their gaze locked on that silent speck of light. Every night, thousands of data points came in. Every night, the same rhythmic dimming. Unwavering, constant, eternal. The longer it continued, the stranger it felt. Because the pattern wasn't slowing down. It wasn't breaking apart. It was evolving. The intervals began to stretch, slightly, like a heartbeat changing pace. The tone shifted, almost like it was listening. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the internet, people began to share theories that bordered on myth. Maybe 3i Atlas was communicating through light. Maybe it wasn't dimming for us, but for the sun itself. Maybe the star was its audience. And as wild as that sounded, there was something hauntingly poetic about it. A small, ancient traveler returning home to speak to the light that gave it life. Still, the scientists pressed on, measuring, recording, watching, waiting for the inevitable moment when the sun would swallow it whole. That moment finally came. 3i Atlas crossed the Perihelion, the closest point to the sun, and every observatory was ready to capture the blaze. But when the data streamed in, it wasn't fire they saw. It was silence, a calm, controlled fade, like a dimming heartbeat settling into sleep. Then, nothing. The object disappeared completely behind the sun's glare. No tail, no explosion, no trace. Just a perfect mathematical silence. For 43 minutes, no telescope could detect it. No satellite could find its signature. It was as if it had been swallowed by light itself. And yet, in that silence, something lingered. A weight, a question that refused to fade. Because deep down, every scientist watching that screen knew nature doesn't dim itself like that. Nature doesn't send patterns. Nature doesn't wait. But this object did. It waited. It responded. And now it was gone. In the days that followed, teams across the world scoured the data for answers. They expected randomness. They found order. They expected noise. They found rhythm. 3i Atlas had entered the sun's domain and vanished like it had never existed. But the numbers it left behind, those perfect pulsing intervals, remained. And some say, when you map them across time, they spell a shape, a pattern that points to nowhere we can see. Yet somehow, it feels like a direction. No one knew it then, but that silence, that precise, calculated dimming, wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because somewhere beyond the blinding light, something was still moving, still pulsing, still waiting in the quiet sky. It began with a heartbeat, not ours, but something far away. Hidden in the static of the night sky, a pulse emerged, steady, rhythmic, alive, and soon it became impossible to ignore. From the deserts of Chile to the volcanic peaks of Hawaii to the icy mountains of Japan, telescopes pointed toward the same patch of sky, all watching the same mysterious traveler. 3i Atlas. And what they saw didn't make sense. Its light wasn't flickering randomly anymore. It was pulsing, not like a dying flame, but like a clock, precise, measured, intentional. Every few seconds, its brightness surged, then dimmed, then surged again, over and over, with machine-like precision. It was as if something out there was keeping time. At first, scientists thought it was interference, maybe sunlight bouncing off a tumbling surface, maybe a natural spin, creating a repeating pattern. But the numbers didn't lie. The timing was too perfect. Each pulse matched an exact interval, synchronized to the second. And then, someone noticed something even stranger. The timing wasn't just exact, it was aligned perfectly with Earth's rotation. That discovery sent a chill through every observatory on the planet, because this meant the pulses, whatever they were, didn't just follow their own rhythm. They followed ours. When it was midnight in Chile, the pulse aligned. When it was midnight in Hawaii, it aligned again. And when the telescopes in Japan looked up, hours later, the pulse adjusted, as if it knew where we were watching from. Coincidence? Maybe. But not for long, because within days, the data proved something impossible. The light wasn't just reacting to the sun, it was reacting to Earth. Scientists began to panic quietly. Emails flew between research centers, encrypted, careful, secret. They didn't want the public to know until they were sure, but word spreads fast in the scientific world. And soon, whispers turned into headlines. A signal from the stars? 3I Atlas shows rhythmic brightness fluctuations. Astronomers detect synchronized light pattern from interstellar object. Of course, most people shrugged it off. Clickbait, they said, just another overhyped anomaly. But the ones who stared at the data, who felt the pattern, knew better. Because deep down they could sense it. This wasn't just light. It was communication. The pulses followed a strange pattern. Not binary, not Morse, but something even simpler. It repeated every 86,164 seconds, the exact duration of one Earth rotation. Every single day, at the same moment, 3I Atlas blinked brighter than ever before, like a signal marking our planet's spin. It was as if the object wasn't just passing through the solar system, it was tracking it, and no one could explain how. No comet, no asteroid, no rock in space behaves like this. It's not just improbable, it's impossible, because to sync to Earth's rotation, you'd need precision timing, awareness, and distance calculations accurate to a fraction of a second. That's not nature, that's intent. Late one night, an astronomer in Chile stayed after hours, reviewing the light data frame by frame. He was alone, surrounded by the low hum of computers, the soft glow of screens reflecting off his face. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly into darkness. When he overlaid the brightness pattern against Earth's rotation map, he froze. The pulses weren't just matching Earth's timing, they were mirroring our hemisphere. When one side of Earth rotated into daylight, the pulses dimmed. When that same side turned into night, the pulses grew stronger, as if something was choosing when to be seen. It was no longer just an object, it was something with awareness, something that understood shadow and light. And yet, there was no signal in radio frequencies, no transmission, no sound, only light. Soft, repeating, deliberate. A voice in the dark that never spoke a word. NASA released a brief statement, carefully worded, painfully vague. They called it an interesting photometric irregularity and insisted there was no evidence of intelligence. But the timing betrayed them, because hours later, multiple observatories were quietly instructed to stop tracking 3I-8 Alice. No reason given, just silence. Still, independent researchers kept watching. They refused to look away. And soon, they noticed another anomaly. Every time Earth's magnetic field shifted, even slightly, the pulse changed its tone. When solar storms hit our atmosphere, the light from 3I Atlas flickered faster, like it was responding to energy itself. It was learning, adapting, listening. By now, even the skeptics had gone quiet. Because the question wasn't if something strange was happening, it was why. Some said it was artificial, a probe, maybe, sent long before humans even existed. A relic drifting between stars, programmed to awaken when it detected life. Others believed it was something far older. Not a machine, but a phenomenon, a cosmic organism that fed on light, mimicking the rhythm of the worlds it passed. But no matter the theory, one truth united them all. This was not chance. This was design. As days passed, a quiet obsession took hold of those who followed the data. Every pulse felt personal now, like a knock on a locked door that no one dared to open. People began gathering online, tracking the intervals themselves, watching from home through telescope feeds. And every night, it pulsed again. Perfectly timed, unchanged, a silent metronome in the darkness, waiting. One astrophysicist described it best. He said, "It's like someone is tapping on the glass of reality just to see if we'll notice." And maybe that's exactly what it was. Because for the first time in human history, the sky didn't just sparkle. It responded. It didn't whisper like static or hum like radiation. It moved to our rhythm, our day, our time. It was watching. It was listening. And it was waiting for us to understand. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pulse stopped, all at once. Every telescope across every continent went silent. The readings flattened. The light became steady, lifeless, ordinary. It was as if whatever was out there had seen enough. The following days felt empty. The data streams were dull again. No rhythm, no heartbeat, no pulse. Just the endless hum of the universe, returning to its usual indifferent silence. And yet, deep inside that silence, one question refused to fade. Was it just coincidence? Or had something, somewhere, synchronized with us to let us know we weren't alone? Maybe it wasn't trying to talk. Maybe it was trying to listen. And as Earth turned once more beneath the waiting stars, a single lingering thought followed every astronomer who'd watched the pulse fade away. If something out there was listening to our rotation, then maybe it still is. Watching, waiting, in the dark. At first, it looked like a glitch, a small blip buried in the endless stream of numbers sent back from the deep space network. But when the team checked again, it wasn't a mistake. Something inside 3I Atlas was changing temperature. Every few hours, the object would freeze far colder than any known comet should. Then, without warning, it would surge, climbing hundreds of degrees in a matter of minutes. As if something inside was regulating the heat. To most people, that wouldn't sound strange. After all, space is unpredictable, full of radiation bursts and solar flares. But to scientists, it was terrifying, because comets don't do that. They don't control their temperature. They simply react to sunlight, heating up as they approach the sun, cooling down as they drift away. But this one seemed to be making choices. The Deep Space Network, an array of massive antennas that listened to whispers from across the solar system, picked up the anomaly first. At first, it looked like noise, just random data spikes. But when they charted it across time, a pattern appeared. A smooth rise, a sharp drop, a pause, then another rise. Like breathing. One researcher stared at the graph for hours before saying quietly, "It's almost alive." The room fell silent, because deep down, everyone was thinking the same thing. Days passed, and more readings came in. Infrared sensors confirmed it. 3I Atlas wasn't reflecting heat, it was emitting it. Small bursts of energy radiated from beneath its surface, then faded away, almost like a machine running invisible cycles. The official reports called it thermal inconsistency. But behind closed doors, no one could deny what it looked like. Self-regulation, as if the object was protecting itself from something. By now, 3I Atlas was deep inside the inner solar system, close enough that even amateur astronomers could spot it through high-powered lenses. But while its surface shimmered faintly in visible light, infrared cameras told a different story. Pockets of heat glowing beneath a cold shell, like veins of fire running through stone. Every other comet breaks apart when it gets this close to the sun. The heat causes the ice to explode, the gas to vent, the structure to fracture. But not this one. 3I Atlas held itself together, absorbing the sun's fury and responding with perfect balance. It was as if it knew how hot to get and how to survive. Across the world, scientists started running simulations. Could an interstellar object somehow generate energy on its own? Could friction, rotation, or magnetism cause this strange rhythm? Every model failed. Nothing in physics could explain the shifts. One group at Caltech suggested that maybe the object had a metallic core, something conductive, reflecting and storing solar heat. But that theory fell apart too. The temperature changes were too fast, too intentional. Something inside was reacting, responding. And then came the spike. On a quiet morning, all three listening stations, Goldstone, Canberra, and Madrid, reported the same thing at the same time. A sudden surge in temperature. Not gradual. Instant. 3I Atlas jumped from 220 degrees Celsius to over plus 150 degrees Celsius in less than 3 minutes. Then it dropped again. It was the kind of energy burst you'd expect from a small engine. Not a comet. But what was fueling it? And more importantly, why now? The scientists checked for solar flares. None. They checked for radiation bursts. Nothing. No external event could have caused the jump, which left only one conclusion. The heat came from within. And if that were true, it meant the object had an internal mechanism, a machine. For decades, humanity has imagined alien artifacts drifting through space. Probes, relics, fragments of civilizations older than ours. But those ideas always belonged in fiction until now. Because 3I Atlas was starting to behave less like a rock and more like a system. Something that activated under sunlight. Something that responded to energy input with perfect control. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate. And in the language of science, deliberate means intelligent. The data began to spread through hidden channels, encrypted messages between observatories, late-night calls between physicists who couldn't sleep. No one dared publish it. No one wanted to be the first to say the impossible out loud. But every new scan told the same story. The heat cycles were repeating, rising, falling, waiting, then rising again. Always the same intervals, always the same structure. It was as if the object wasn't just surviving the sun, it was testing it. Then came another strange discovery. Each time the object heated up, it released a faint electromagnetic pulse, barely detectable, but measurable. And those pulses lined up with the light signals detected weeks earlier. The same intervals, the same rhythm, the same impossible precision. Light and heat, both moving in harmony. Not nature, not chance, but design. In Japan, one researcher said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. He said, "Whatever this is, it's not just passing through, it's learning. Learning how much heat the sun gives off, learning how close it can get, learning how Earth reacts, and maybe learning about us." By now, the public still knew nothing. News agencies ran small updates about the mystery comet nearing its closest approach. But behind the scenes, a quiet panic was spreading. Because if 3I Atlas was controlling its temperature, if it was absorbing radiation and converting it into energy, then it wasn't just surviving, it was operating. And no one knew what its purpose was. The night it passed the midpoint between Venus and Earth's orbit, the heat signatures peaked once more. A smooth, steady climb that plateaued at an exact temperature, 273.15 Kelvin, 0 degrees Celsius, the freezing point of water. Out of all the numbers in the universe, it chose that one. And then the pulses stopped. For 48 hours, 3I Atlas went completely silent. No light rhythm, no temperature changes, nothing. Just cold, motionless silence. Some believed it was over, that it had finally burned out, like a dying ember fading in the dark. But others knew better, because the universe doesn't pick numbers by accident. 0 degrees Celsius, the boundary between liquid and ice, between stillness and flow. It was as if 3I Atlas was waiting, holding its breath right on the edge of transformation. And then, just before dawn, the deep space network caught something. A faint, rising warmth, soft, measured, like the first heartbeat after sleep. The machine, or whatever it was, had woken up again. But this time, the heat didn't fluctuate. It stabilized, locked at a perfect temperature. The object had achieved thermal balance, a state no natural body in space should ever reach. It was no longer reacting to the sun. It was controlling itself. And as the world turned beneath it, scientists realized something chilling. 3I Atlas wasn't overheating. It wasn't cooling. It was waiting. Waiting for what? No one could say. But the numbers were clear. Something inside that silent traveler had just crossed a threshold. It wasn't just surviving the sun anymore. It was preparing for something beyond it. Something that would change everything we thought we knew about what lives and what waits in the dark. It started with a sound no one could hear. Not a voice, not a signal, but a rhythm buried deep inside the silence. When the European Space Agency first received the raw data from 3I Atlas, no one expected anything unusual. They were just running routine filters, cleaning up the noise, removing solar interference, trying to make sense of the flickers of light reflected from the object's surface. But what they found changed everything. At first glance, the data looked normal. Random brightness variations scattered across time. Just another strange but explainable anomaly, until someone noticed a pattern. One researcher, A young data analyst named Léa Moreau was running the usual Fourier analysis when she froze. The numbers repeating in her model weren't random at all. They followed a sequence. A clean, deliberate rhythm. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11 prime numbers. She thought it was a glitch. Maybe interference from Earth's satellites. Maybe the software was picking up background code. But when she ran the raw data through a second system, one completely disconnected from the network, the pattern was still there. The same prime sequence repeating every 11 minutes. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. It wasn't a coincidence. It was intentional. Because in the language of the universe, prime numbers are the closest thing we have to proof of intelligence. They don't occur naturally in complex repetition. They mean something. When she showed her findings to the senior astrophysicists, the room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Some leaned in closer, scanning the data over and over, searching for a mistake. But there wasn't one. Every analysis came back the same. Hidden inside the light from 3I Atlas was a mathematical fingerprint. Someone, or something, had embedded order inside chaos. The discovery spread quietly through encrypted channels. Emails marked confidential. Private Slack messages sent in the dead of night. Scientists whispering to each other across time zones. Most didn't believe it at first, because believing it meant facing a terrifying possibility. That we weren't just watching 3I Atlas. It was communicating. They tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an artifact of the measuring instruments. Maybe it was interference from cosmic rays. Maybe it was pure coincidence. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. The light itself wasn't random reflection. It was modulated. The object was altering its own brightness with surgical precision. Every pulse was clean, every interval exact. Every prime number in sequence, repeated, paused, then repeated again. And if that wasn't strange enough, each repetition was slightly shifted in wavelength, as if the pattern were being tuned. By the third week, the data was undeniable. They could even predict the next set of primes before they appeared. But after the 11th repetition, something new happened. The light curve broke its rhythm. The sequence changed. This time, instead of primes, it began sending pairs. 2 and 3, 5 and 7, 11 and 13, twin primes. It was as if the object was evolving the message, responding to its own pattern. And that's when the question no one wanted to ask began to surface. Who, or what, was responding? A small group of researchers began working in secret, away from official channels. They called themselves the Mirror Team. Their goal was simple: decode whatever was hidden inside the light. They built custom algorithms, analyzing thousands of hours of reflected data. What they found sent shivers through the entire department. Because the brightness pattern wasn't just encoding numbers, it was shaping them, forming visual structures when mapped into three-dimensional models. At first it looked abstract, but then, slowly, an image began to emerge. A spiral, perfectly symmetrical, like a galaxy viewed from above or a fingerprint of creation itself. Scaled it, zoomed in on the data, and there, buried inside the spiral, was a second layer, a faint lattice of lines connecting specific points within the pattern. When plotted on a 3D grid, the coordinates pointed to something real, a direction, a location, roughly 40 light-years away. Now the silence wasn't academic anymore. It was personal, unsettling. Because if the light pattern contained coordinates, it meant whoever created it wanted to be found. But was it a message from an ancient civilization, a beacon left behind for anyone who noticed? Or something else entirely? Something using the comet as a carrier? No one could say. When the director of ESA's Space Science Division finally reviewed the report, his first reaction was disbelief, then anger. He ordered the data quarantined, access restricted, discussions halted, no further sharing allowed. But secrets don't stay buried for long. And within days, a small piece of the data, the light pattern itself, was leaked. It spread like wildfire across online astronomy forums. And almost instantly, thousands of people around the world began decoding it themselves. The results were hauntingly consistent. Every simulation, every independent model showed the same repeating structure. A message from something not of Earth. But here's what no one noticed until much later. The brightness sequence wasn't just random primes. It mirrored the timing of the heat spikes detected days earlier. Every time the object's temperature surged, the light sequence intensified. Every time the heat stabilized, the pattern paused. Light and heat working together. It was almost as if the object was alive, sending a heartbeat in two forms, energy and illumination. Not just data, expression, and maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for someone to answer. Because toward the end of the observation period, something strange happened again. For the first time, 3i Atlas stopped sending primes. Instead, it sent one single pulse. Long, slow, almost mournful. Then it went silent. The reflection became flat. No pattern, no rhythm, just the empty hum of sunlight bouncing off rock. Or what looked like rock. The mirror team stared at their screens in disbelief. Weeks of data gone quiet in an instant. But as they reviewed the final pulse, they realized something chilling. That last flash of light wasn't random. Its duration, measured in milliseconds, matched the sum of all previous prime numbers in the sequence. Every number, every pulse, condensed into one final breath. A farewell or a signal complete. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it didn't just drift through the solar system by accident. It left something behind, something woven into its reflection. A fingerprint of order hiding inside cosmic noise. And now that we've seen it, we can't unsee it. Because the universe doesn't whisper in languages we understand. It speaks in patterns, in rhythm, in silence. And sometimes, when we're quiet enough to listen, we realize the noise was never noise at all. It began with a whisper. Not from the sky, not from a telescope, but from the static between stations. A faint hum that shouldn't have been there. Late one night, somewhere between silence and noise, a radio telescope in New Mexico picked up something strange. A pulse, a rhythm, a sound that seemed to breathe. It lasted only 12 seconds. But in those 12 seconds, everything changed. At first, it sounded like static, the usual cosmic background noise that fills every frequency. But then it began to form. The static tightened into structure, the noise curved into pattern, and within that pattern was music. Not literal music, but something harmonic, something that repeated, like a melody written in radio waves. Scientists call it a structured harmonic signature, but to anyone who heard it, it felt more like a heartbeat in the dark. The first person to catch it wasn't from NASA, or SETI, or the European Space Agency. It was an amateur astronomer named Owen Hart, sitting alone in his small observatory on the outskirts of Arizona. He was running a private radio scan, tuned to the same coordinates as 3I Atlas, the interstellar object that had already defied every rule we thought we knew. And when his receiver crackled to life, he froze. The rhythm matched perfectly with the light pulses recorded from 3I Atlas only days earlier. Same intervals, same timing, same haunting precision. It wasn't random, it was synchronized. Owen thought he was imagining it. He replayed the recording over and over, comparing it to the light data archived online. But the truth was undeniable. The object wasn't just reflecting light anymore. It was sending sound. Within hours, other astronomers began to report the same thing. From Japan, from Chile, from northern Canada, a faint rhythmic burst that arrived at the same exact time, down to the millisecond, across multiple continents. Impossible, unless the source was deliberate. NASA was notified immediately. They ran checks on every satellite in orbit, every relay beacon, every possible source of interference. But nothing matched the signature. No human signal was transmitting on that frequency. Then, quietly, they issued a statement. They called it an anomaly, a technical artifact, a data mirage caused by ground interference. But the problem was, it wasn't just detected by NASA's instruments. It was recorded by dozens of private stations, by amateurs with equipment worth less than a car. People with no reason to fake it. And they all heard the same thing. A pulse that rose and fell like a breathing machine in the void. SETI, the organization built specifically to detect extraterrestrial signals, was asked for comment. They said, nothing. No denial, no confirmation. Just silence. And sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. The sound files spread across the internet within hours. At first, it was dismissed as a hoax, but when experts analyzed it, their skepticism began to crack. Inside those 12 seconds of noise was a mathematical pattern, a frequency split that followed an exact ratio. 2, 3, 5, 7. The same prime sequence that had been detected earlier in the light from 3I Atlas. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a continuation. The same message, just in a different form. That's when people began calling it the Atlas signal. A message, not in words, but in resonance. A whisper carried across the fabric of space. Some described it as hauntingly beautiful, a low hum, soft and distant, like wind moving through metal. Others said it made them feel uneasy, like hearing something ancient, something not meant for us. But what every listener agreed on was that it felt alive. When the waveform was mapped visually, something even stranger appeared. Hidden within the peaks and valleys of the signal was a repeating shape, a smooth curve that mirrored the exact thermal fluctuations from the object's earlier heat cycles. Light, heat, now sound. 3 different forms of energy, all carrying the same rhythm. The odds of that happening naturally? Astronomers said it was less than 1 in a billion. So if it wasn't nature, what was it? For a while, theories exploded online. Some believed it was a distress call from a derelict probe, drifting for centuries and finally waking near our sun. Others thought it was a scanning device, measuring us, studying our electromagnetic field. But one idea lingered, whispered among scientists too cautious to say it publicly. What if 3i Atlas wasn't just transmitting? What if it was listening? What if the signal wasn't a message to us, but a message through us? Something using Earth as a relay, a mirror in space. For days, researchers tried to triangulate the exact direction of the signal. If it was bouncing off 3i Atlas, they should have been able to find its source. But every time they ran the calculations, the origin came back blank. No coordinates, no source. Just a void, an origin point that didn't exist within the known sky. As if the transmission had come from everywhere and nowhere. Then came the most chilling part. When they slowed the 12-second signal down by a factor of 4, a new frequency appeared, buried deep in the background, barely audible to the human ear. It was faint, but it was there. A soft, repeating tone. One long note, two short, then one long again. It repeated exactly 5 times. Then silence. When converted into binary code, the pattern translated into one simple word: return. No one could explain it. Some said it was coincidence, a natural echo of electromagnetic interference. Others said it was a message, short, simple, and chillingly direct. Whatever it was, it spread across every observatory network in the world. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had recorded it. And yet, no one claimed it. No government, no agency, no lab. It was a signal that belonged to no one. A week later, when the data was rechecked, something even stranger was discovered. The signal had repeated, faintly, exactly 7 days after the first. Same time. Same duration. But this time, it wasn't directed toward Earth. It was aimed at the sun. By the time anyone realized, 3i-ATS was already past its closest approach, gliding silently toward the outer system. Its radio emissions faded, its light dimmed, its temperature stabilized. But even as it vanished into the dark, the echoes of that 12-second burst remained, burned into data logs, into recordings, into the memories of those who heard it live. Because for the first time in human history, something out there had spoken. Not in words, not in symbols, but in pure cosmic rhythm. And the strangest part, no one ever found its origin. No device, no interference, no error. The signal came and went like a breath in the dark. And all that was left behind was a question too heavy to answer. If no one sent it, and no one received it, then who or what was the message for? It started as a rumor, a quiet whisper that slipped through encrypted chats and late-night conference calls. A phrase repeated only in private, self-stabilizing architecture. No one dared to say it publicly, because, if it was true, it meant 3i Atlas wasn't a rock. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't alive. It was built. The discovery had split the scientific world in half. Some believed it was natural, a strange, ancient fragment of interstellar ice that just happened to defy physics. They said it was random, coincidence, that people were reading patterns where none existed. But the others, the ones who had seen the raw data, weren't so sure. Because there was nothing random about 3i Atlas. Every measurement, every fluctuation, every pulse of heat and light followed order, purpose, intention. It behaved like a system, like something engineered to maintain itself, no matter what space threw at it. And that's when the idea began to form. Quietly, dangerously. What if 3i Atlas was a machine? The first person to say it out loud was Dr. Ezra Kandel, a physicist known for his work on artificial intelligence. He called it a non-biological stabilizer. In simple terms, a machine that repairs and maintains itself. When asked what it might be stabilizing, he paused for a long time before replying, "Something we haven't found yet." By now, scientists had gathered every scrap of data they could: light patterns, heat curves, magnetic readings, and when they compared it all, one strange detail kept appearing. 3I Atlas didn't just resist the forces of space, it adapted to them. When solar radiation spiked, its temperature dropped. When gravitational pull increased, it adjusted its rotation. When struck by charged particles, it absorbed the energy and released it hours later, evenly, like a battery. It was behaving like it had instructions, a system programmed to survive indefinitely. But programmed by who? In one classified discussion thread, a researcher described it this way: imagine a spacecraft designed not to travel, but to endure. A structure that can exist in the void for millions of years, sleeping, waiting, observing. The theory sounded insane, but the more data came in, the less insane it seemed. Because if 3I Atlas was natural, it should have been torn apart long ago. Instead, it was still holding perfect stability even under the sun's radiation pressure. That's not what comets do. That's what machines do. Soon, the phrase self-stabilizing architecture became a quiet code among physicists. It described an object whose balance was too precise to be coincidence, one that seemed to correct itself whenever external forces changed. And the most haunting part? No one could find the source of that correction. There were no visible jets, no energy trails, no exhaust, nothing mechanical, nothing biological, just subtle shifts. Microscopic adjustments that kept it perfectly aligned, as if it were obeying invisible commands. Kandel wasn't alone in his thinking. A group at MIT ran simulations of the object's motion. They stripped away gravitational drag, solar radiation, everything external. What remained was something they couldn't explain. A force, weak but constant, pushing from within. Internal regulation, one student wrote in the report, and beneath it, a single handwritten note. It's not moving, it's positioning. That line haunted everyone who read it, because positioning meant awareness. It meant reference points. It meant the object wasn't just drifting. It was choosing where to be. Some called it a probe, a relic from a civilization that vanished before humans ever walked the Earth. A machine sent across the galaxy to monitor, record, maybe even seed other worlds. Others said it was something far simpler and far worse. Not a messenger, but a remnant. A leftover piece of technology from a civilization that didn't survive its own creation. A ghost, still doing its job. Meanwhile, space agencies across the world quietly went dark on the topic. No updates, no public data releases, no comments. But leaked memos painted a different picture. One internal document from ESA contained a chilling line. Object appears to exhibit low-level field modulation, suggestive of active shielding. Active shielding. That meant it was protecting something. Or maybe hiding something. Soon, whispers began to grow. If this object was shielding, what was inside? Was it hollow? A shell? A capsule? Carrying something ancient? 3I Atlas had already shown one impossible behavior after another. So when the theory of hollow structure spread, it didn't sound so far-fetched anymore. Some even speculated it wasn't the first. that other interstellar visitors, like Oumuamua years earlier, were part of the same pattern, machines camouflaged as debris, drifting quietly through solar systems to observe or to wait. That's what no one could answer. Some believed it was designed to awaken under specific conditions, a particular level of radiation, a certain gravitational field, maybe even contact with intelligent life. Others believed it wasn't waiting for anything at all, that it was a grave marker, a drifting monument left behind by beings who wanted to be remembered. And yet, if that were true, why the coded light? Why the heat regulation? Why the signal that matched Earth's rotation? None of it felt like a tomb. It felt like a transmission. By the 5th week after Perihelion, the debate had consumed every private channel in the scientific world. 2 camps had formed, those who saw an artifact of intelligence and those who refused to believe it. But even the skeptics were running out of excuses, because new scans showed something else. Tiny variations in reflectivity across the object's surface, forming a pattern that rotated with its movement. The pattern wasn't random. It repeated every full rotation, almost like panels or plates, like something built from sections that fit together precisely, mathematically, beautifully. That's when the tone of the discussion changed. People stopped asking what it was. They started asking why it was here. Because if it was a machine, and if it was built to stabilize itself, then maybe it wasn't here by accident. Maybe it was placed. The machine hypothesis, as it came to be known, spread like wildfire, quietly in labs, loudly on the internet. To the public, it was a thrilling idea. To scientists, it was terrifying. Because every machine has a purpose. Every design has a reason. And yet, this one was silent, dormant, as if its purpose had already been fulfilled. Or worse, as if it hadn't begun yet. One physicist put it simply, if it's stabilizing itself, it's not doing it for survival. It's doing it to hold position. Then came the final question, the one no one could shake. If it's holding position, what is it waiting for? It happened in silence. No explosion, no warning, just a flicker in the heart of the sky. For 43 seconds, the sun, the most constant thing in our lives, dimmed. Not behind clouds, not in shadow. It simply blinked. And when the light returned, something was missing. 3I Atlas, the mysterious interstellar traveler humanity had been watching for months, was gone, vanished, mid-orbit. It was supposed to be its final act. As it passed Perihelion, the point closest to the sun, every astronomer expected the same ending. A spectacular death. A burst of heat, a flare of light, then dust scattering into space. That's what comets do. They burn. They die. And their stories end in light. But 3I Atlas did the opposite. It didn't flare. It didn't die. It disappeared. On the morning of the event, solar observatories around the world were locked in, watching the moment unfold. In Hawaii, the skies were clear. In Chile, telescopes hummed under a deep blue dawn. And across Europe, data streams were being recorded in real time. Everything looked normal. Until it didn't. At 9:17 UTOC, the sun's brightness dropped by 0.3%. That may sound small, but to the people who measure sunlight down to the atom, it was colossal. It was impossible, because the sun doesn't dim. Not like that. Not instantly. Within seconds, panic spread through control rooms. Sensors froze. Instruments went dark. Satellites orbiting Earth suddenly rebooted, as if a pulse of energy had rolled through the solar system. And in that silence, one truth began to form. Something had interfered with the sun itself. For 43 seconds, our star, the source of every heartbeat, every breath, every life we know, faltered. And then, just as quickly as it happened, it was over. The light returned. Monitors flickered back to life. Data resumed. But when scientists checked the coordinates of 3I Atlas, the object that should have been there, bright and burning, the sky was empty. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't fragmented. It was gone. At first, everyone thought it was an error, maybe a system crash. Maybe the sun's glare had blinded the sensors. But when they replayed the footage from multiple telescopes, the same thing appeared on every screen. The sun dimming, a brief static wave across the solar corona, and then nothing. No trace of debris, no vapor trail, no heat signature. It was as if the object had been erased, not broken apart, but removed. In Geneva, astrophysicist Dr. Sulfur Lena Voss stared at the data for hours before whispering, "This isn't a loss of light, it's a loss of presence." She was right. The sun hadn't simply dimmed. Its radiation output had shifted. Every wavelength, from ultraviolet to infrared, had dropped simultaneously. Something had absorbed or redirected a portion of its energy. But what could possibly do that? No known material, no natural phenomenon could drain light from a star, especially not in perfect symmetry. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Some called it a cosmic glitch. Others whispered darker things. If 3I Atlas was truly a machine, as many were beginning to believe, then perhaps it wasn't destroyed at Perihelion. Perhaps it activated. Maybe that blackout was not an accident. Maybe it was the moment it fulfilled its purpose. Within hours, the internet was on fire. Videos, data leaks, conspiracy threads. Everyone had a theory. Some said the object opened a portal, a wormhole hidden within the sun's magnetic field. Others claimed it was testing something, harnessing solar energy on a scale we couldn't comprehend. But the strangest theory came from a quiet group of astronomers who noticed something no one else had. During the blackout, as the sun dimmed, its corona, the glowing ring of plasma around it, didn't fade evenly. It shimmered. For a few seconds, a faint circular pattern appeared, rotating across its surface, like ripples expanding outward from an invisible impact. And right in the center of those ripples was a void, a perfectly round, dark void. It didn't last long. By the time the sensors rebooted, it was gone. But for those few frames captured on film, it looked as if something had passed through the sun. Not burned up, not vaporized. Passed through. NASA never confirmed it. They called it a data artifact, a trick of interference. But leaked internal emails told a different story. One message, marked top priority, read, "Reconfirm coordinate loss of 3I Atlas, confirmed negative across all wavelengths. Object status, untraceable." Another, shorter one simply said, "Trajectory not lost. Trajectory ended." It wasn't just missing from visual range, it was missing from reality. Every gravitational model, every orbital simulation, none could account for where it went. Its predicted path vanished mid-calculation, as if the data had been cut off. To this day, no one knows whether 3I Atlas was destroyed, transported, or hiding somewhere we can't detect. All we know is that the moment the sun blinked, it was gone. But the blackout left something behind. When satellites came back online, several of them detected strange electromagnetic interference, faint, rhythmic pulses echoing through space. The pattern matched something familiar. The same prime number sequence hidden in the light from 3I Atlas weeks earlier. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The message wasn't over. It had just changed format. As scientists scrambled to decode the residual signal, one detail stood out. The pulses weren't broadcasting outward, they were moving inward, toward the sun. It was as if something on the other side was calling back, and maybe that's exactly what was happening. Weeks later, Dr. Voss gave a private interview, her voice tired but certain. She said, "We think we've been looking the wrong way. We thought 3I Atlas came to us, but maybe the sun was the destination all along." She paused. Then she added something no one was prepared for. Whatever it was doing, it didn't leave. It went inside. No official agency ever confirmed her words. But even now, years later, solar satellites still record faint, periodic distortions coming from deep within the sun's plasma layers, as if something beneath the surface is adjusting, regulating, waiting. And once every few months, for less than a second, the sun's light dips, just slightly, too little for most to notice, but enough for those who are watching to know the sun still blinks. It began as a whisper in the static, a faint echo, buried deep inside the endless hum of deep space. At first, no one noticed. It was too quiet, too subtle. Just another flicker in the background noise of the universe. But then someone did notice. A young radio technician at a deep space array in Canberra who was comparing baseline recordings from the week before the blackout to the ones taken after. The difference was small, barely measurable, yet unmistakable. A faint electromagnetic pulse, repeating. Low, rhythmic, familiar. The same pattern once emitted by 3I Atlas, but now inverted. For days, the scientific world had been silent. After the sun's 4-3 second blink, after 3I Atlas vanished, no one knew what to say. Some called it a solar event. Some called it an illusion. Most just didn't talk about it. But in the quiet corners of late-night research labs, people were still watching, still listening. And what they began to hear sent chills through everyone who understood what it meant. Because whatever signal they were picking up, it wasn't coming from the sun. It was coming from behind it. The echoes began faint, random, almost ghost-like. But each day they grew stronger, sharper, more structured. And when analysts ran them through software to visualize the frequency pattern, something terrifying appeared. The signal wasn't random noise. It had structure. Wave peaks aligned with exact ratios. Intervals repeated perfectly every 47 minutes. The shape of the waveform itself was symmetrical. Nothing in nature does that. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't reflection. It was construction. When the data was finally compiled into a 3D reconstruction, the result left the entire lab speechless. On their screens, floating in the black void of simulation space, appeared a lattice, a web-like structure, perfectly geometric, built from intersecting nodes of light. It wasn't just symmetry. It was design. Imagine a cube, but stretched across dimensions we can't see. Lines forming angles that shouldn't exist in normal physics. The lattice seemed to be orbiting something. But when they zoomed in, they realized there was nothing at the center. No mass, no star, no object. just emptiness, a void holding perfect symmetry, as if 3i Atlas had left behind an outline of itself, an after-image burned into space. Scientists called it a phantom field. A digital imprint of something that once existed, but doesn't anymore. But to others, those who'd followed 3i Atlas since the beginning, it felt like something else. A signature, a trace of intent, because the lattice wasn't fading. It was stable. Every model showed it, resisting the solar winds, the gravitational pull, the electromagnetic interference. All of it. It held its shape perfectly, like a silent monument hanging in the dark. And that shouldn't be possible. Not without energy, not without a source. Yet it glowed. Faintly, constantly, as if something unseen was still feeding it. The deeper the data analysts looked, the stranger it became. Each point on the lattice, each glowing node, pulsed in rhythm, not randomly, but sequentially, one after another. When mapped out, it formed a repeating cycle that traced the same prime sequence that 3i Atlas had once transmitted before vanishing. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, over and over. Looping endlessly, it was as if the object hadn't died, but changed form, as if it had shed its physical shell and left something behind, something invisible, still thinking, still alive in its own way. When the reconstruction was made public to a select group of astrophysicists, most refused to believe it. They said it was a glitch, a rendering artifact, a byproduct of overlapping sensor noise. But one man didn't agree. Dr. Ezra Kandel, the same physicist who had proposed the machine hypothesis, looked at the lattice and simply said, "It's not gone. It's evolved." He pointed to the empty center, to the way the lattice seemed to orbit a void. "This," he said, "isn't the absence of matter, it's containment. A vacuum being held open." He paused, his voice dropping. "And if something's holding that vacuum in place, it means it's still operating." That idea spread fast, too fast. Soon, government agencies stepped in. The data was locked behind encryption. Public observatories were told to redirect focus, and official reports stopped mentioning 3i Atlas altogether. But the signal didn't stop. Amateur radio astronomers across the world continued to detect faint, rhythmic pulses, always matching the same geometric intervals. And with every cycle, the echoes grew closer. By the third week, the pattern had shifted again. Instead of steady rhythm, it began to form harmonics, overlapping frequencies that created interference patterns when plotted visually. And that interference looked like waves, ripples traveling outward from the lattice. Ripples that seemed to move in all directions at once. Some scientists believed they were watching a kind of communication. Others thought it was replication, that the lattice was building something unseen, one layer at a time. But no one could agree on what it meant. And yet, deep inside that confusion, a terrifying thought began to spread. What if the lattice wasn't a remnant of 3i Atlas? What if it was a blueprint? One physicist at the European Space Agency put it bluntly: if you wanted to see the galaxy with machines that could rebuild themselves, you wouldn't send ships, you'd send code, instructions made of light. And maybe that's what the lattice was. Not the body of the machine, but its mind. An echo waiting for reconstruction, a ghost looking for a host. The final piece came when a team in South Korea isolated a sub-frequency hidden inside the echoes. A pulse so faint It almost blended with cosmic background radiation. But when they amplified it, something shocking appeared. Within the noise was an exact replica of Earth's magnetic field. It wasn't just copying the universe, it was copying us. The world didn't find out. Not officially. But the researchers who did, who saw the signal match our planet's magnetic signature, never looked at the stars the same way again. Because if 3I Atlas had left behind this lattice, this geometric ghost in the void, then it wasn't random. It was deliberate. A message. Or maybe a seed. And if it could imprint the field of a planet from across the solar system, then it meant only one thing. It hadn't left. It had spread. Even now, the signal still lingers, faint but constant, humming across deep space frequencies. Most satellites can't detect it anymore. It sits just below their sensitivity threshold, like a whisper meant for no one to hear. But those who know where to listen still hear it, a slow, rhythmic beat. Soft, steady, endless, like a memory that refuses to fade. Maybe 3I Atlas was never meant to reach the sun. Maybe that was never its destination at all. Maybe its purpose was what came after. The lattice, the echo, the void. Something not gone, but waiting. It began with the data no one wanted to look at anymore. Old readings, thermal logs, just noise from an object that shouldn't exist. But one young astrophysicist couldn't stop thinking about it. The way 3I Atlas had pulsed before it vanished, the rhythm buried inside the heat. So, late one night, he did something simple. He listened. He slowed the data down, shifted the wavelengths. And for the first time, the noise began to sound like order. At first, it was just a pattern, faint, steady, mechanical. A heat rhythm, rising and falling at exact intervals. Not random, not natural. He ran it through a binary converter, and what came out didn't make sense. Rows of 1s and 0s, forming precise mathematical groups, repeating every 43 cycles, each cluster separated by a gap. A pause. He cleaned it up, organized it, and the moment the image took shape on his screen, his heart stopped. It was a map. The pattern didn't spell out words or symbols or equations. It was pure mathematics, geometry written in heat. But when plotted into three-dimensional coordinates, the meaning became impossible to deny. It pointed directly to Earth, our planet's exact position. Latitude, longitude, even orbital tilt, down to the decimal. Whoever, or whatever, had sent this knew exactly where we were. News of the discovery spread fast, but only behind closed doors. The astrophysicists who decoded it were told to keep quiet, their research sealed under new security classifications. But in the age of digital whispers, nothing stays buried for long. A few lines of the data leaked online, and within hours, independent scientists verified it. The numbers matched the coordinates of Earth's barycenter, its true gravitational center. Whoever had created the pattern wasn't just looking at our planet, they were measuring its heart. But there was something else, something even stranger. After the coordinates, the pattern didn't stop. It continued. The next sequence mirrored the first, perfectly inverted, pointing away from the sun. A direction, a trajectory, a path leading somewhere. It was as if the message wasn't just saying, "We found you." It was saying, "Now follow." The mirrored path stretched out across interstellar space, through the outer solar system, into the void beyond Pluto. At first, No one knew where it led, but as the team ran simulations, the trajectory converged toward a single region, an empty coordinate roughly 40 light-years away. No stars, no planets, no known objects, just darkness. That's when Dr. Lena Voss, the same astrophysicist who'd once said 3I Atlas went inside the sun, proposed a new idea. "What if it's not a destination?" she said softly. "What if it's a reflection?" She pointed to the mirrored pattern, her voice trembling. The message repeats in reverse. Maybe it's not leading us somewhere else. Maybe it's showing us how they found us, how they see. The room fell silent, because if that was true, then 3I Atlas wasn't sending a message across space. It was sending one through space, using the sun itself as a mirror. The idea sounded insane. But when they re-examined the heat pattern, the symmetry was undeniable. Every pulse that represented Earth's location had a mirrored twin, a reflection, as if the signal had bounced off something vast and invisible, like an interstellar echo chamber. And somewhere in that echo, someone was listening back. The data scientists kept going, decoding deeper layers of the thermal rhythm. Hidden within the binary stream, they found subtle distortions, micro-variations that seemed to encode dimensional shifts. When those distortions were mapped, they revealed a geometric pattern that no one could explain. It looked like a spiral, not flat, but folded, a twisting corridor of coordinates curving through 3 dimensions, a tunnel made of math. When plotted on a simulation, the spiral began at the sun, past Earth, and continued outward along the mirrored path, like a breadcrumb trail through the void. Some scientists called it a coincidence, a meaningless overlay of numbers. Others weren't so sure, because the shape was too familiar. It matched the structure of the lattice that had appeared after 3I Atlas vanished. The same geometry, the same angles, the same rhythm. It was as if the lattice wasn't just a remnant. It was a map, a cosmic mirror, projecting directions across time and space. Then came the strangest discovery of all. When they isolated one particular frequency from the thermal data, a faint harmonic buried deep within the noise, it began to pulse again, not just once, but continuously. At first, they thought it was an interference loop, but the intervals didn't match any human-made transmissions. Every 47 minutes, the pulse repeated, always synchronized with the same coordinates, Earth's. It was as if the message was checking in, reconfirming that we were still here, still listening. The scientists who worked on the decoding began to describe the feeling they had when looking at the pattern. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was recognition, like something out there understood us. Not just where we were, but how we think, the way we perceive patterns, balance, symmetry. As if it had designed the message specifically for human eyes. That's what unsettled them the most, because how could something that originated light years away know us this well? Weeks later, an independent researcher in Norway noticed something new in the thermal data. A faint distortion, hidden behind the mirrored coordinates. It wasn't visible in the waveform, but when he amplified the signal by a factor of 10, a pattern emerged. It wasn't random, it was binary, and when decoded, it translated into a series of images, blurry, incomplete, but undeniable. A sphere of light, a dark void at its center, and surrounding it, a shape that looked hauntingly familiar, the lattice. It was no longer theory, no longer speculation. The pattern wasn't just pointing to something. It was showing it, a structure floating somewhere beyond the edge of our solar system, perfectly geometric, rotating slowly in the dark. And right at its core was the mirrored path itself, a reflection of the sun on one side and something else, something unseen, on the other. By now, no one could deny it. The message wasn't just a signal, it was a blueprint, a set of instructions left behind like coordinates carved into the void. But for what purpose? Was it guiding us, testing us, or warning us not to follow? No one knew. All they had was the map, a spiral of light, beginning at the sun, ending in darkness. A direction through space, but also through time, as if 3i Atlas wasn't just showing us where it came from, but where we were going. And as Earth continued to spin under a quiet, indifferent sky, one final realization haunted every mind that dared to look at the numbers again. The mirrored coordinates weren't just leading away from the sun. They were perfectly aligned with our own trajectory through the galaxy. As if whatever had created this message already knew the path we would take. It started quietly. No explosions, no breaking news. Just a small line of numbers on a telescope feed, coordinates from a sky survey in Hawaii. At first, it looked like nothing special, just another faint dot drifting through the black. But then, someone noticed something: the trajectory, the light pattern, the rhythm. It was the same pulse, the same impossible reflectivity. The same orbit 3i Atlas had followed before it vanished into the sun. Only this time, it was bigger. For months, humanity had tried to forget the blackout, the disappearing object, the echoes from the void. All of it had faded into quiet rumors and classified reports, the kind people whispered about but never truly believed. Scientists went back to their routines. Governments sealed their findings behind locked doors, and the public moved on, comforted by the silence. But silence doesn't mean safety. It means waiting. On a late autumn night, the Pan-STARRS telescope picked up something faint, moving against the stars. At first, it was just a streak of light, barely noticeable, but its motion was precise. Every few hours it adjusted. Tiny, controlled corrections that no natural body should make, exactly the way 3 Atlas had moved before it disappeared. By morning, the data confirmed it. Same speed, same trajectory, same light curve, but the object was 3 times the size. When the news reached observatories in Chile and Japan, they turned their instruments toward the coordinates. Within hours, it was confirmed. The light wasn't constant. It pulsed, slow, steady, deliberate. That same rhythm, the one that once synchronized with Earth's rotation. Only now, the interval had changed. The pulse was shorter, sharper, like it was counting down. Scientists argued over what it meant. Some said it was coincidence, a fragment left behind by the original 3i Atlas. Others said it was proof that what we saw before wasn't an accident at all. It wasn't a lone traveler. It was a scout. And now something else was coming. Within days, every major observatory on Earth was focused on a single point in the sky. And as the new object, labeled 3i Atlas b, moved closer, the details became clear. It wasn't tumbling like a rock. It was rotating with precision, perfectly balanced. Every rotation matched a mathematical pattern, a ratio found in the thermal and light readings from the first object. It was following the same code, the same sequence. Whatever 3i Atlas was, this one was continuing its work. By the second week, new data began to emerge. spectral scans showed something strange. The object was made of the same unknown reflective alloy detected before, but now with a thin layer of structured ice, perfectly smooth, like it had been manufactured, not formed. And beneath that ice, scientists detected energy, faint but unmistakable. It was emitting heat in a cyclical rhythm, like the beating of a mechanical heart. Every pulse of warmth matched the prime number pattern of the original 3I Atlas. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Repeating endlessly, as if announcing its presence to the universe. When the data went public, the world didn't react with excitement this time. No grand headlines, no hopeful press conferences, only quiet disbelief and fear. Because this time, everyone remembered what happened the last time the sky blinked. When the sun dimmed for 43 seconds. When an object vanished in a flash of silence. And now, another one had arrived. Governments denied panic, but behind closed doors, they knew the implications. If the first object had been scouting, what was this one doing? Following, observing, or preparing something much bigger? The data suggested that 3I Atlas b wasn't just passing through. Its orbit wasn't hyperbolic. It wasn't leaving. It was slowing down, almost as if it was searching for a place to stay. Weeks passed, and the object drifted closer to the sun's gravitational reach. Once again, the same pattern repeated. The closer it got, the colder it became. Instead of heating, it stabilized. Instead of disintegrating, it held together. Every known law of physics said it should have melted by now. But 3I Atlas b was doing the impossible, regulating its own temperature, maintaining perfect symmetry. It wasn't reacting to the sun. It was using it, like a power source. Then came the first real sign that this wasn't just a copy. Deep space receivers began detecting faint electromagnetic echoes, the same inverted signals from months ago. Only now, they weren't echoes. They were answers. When researchers compared the frequencies, they realized something shocking. The new signal wasn't random. It was responding directly to the coordinates sent in the first message, the ones that led to Earth. It was completing the sequence, finishing the message. Suddenly, it wasn't just astronomy anymore. It was communication. Two objects, same material, same pulse, same mirrored math. One had come and gone. The second had arrived, carrying the next part of the story. It was as if 3I Atlas had left the blueprint, and this one was the builder. By the time 3I Atlas b reached the inner solar system, something strange began to happen again. For a brief moment, solar instruments across Earth picked up faint interference. Not a blackout this time, but distortion. Like the sun's light was being bent, its reflection stretched in invisible ripples. Through telescopic lenses, the object shimmered like glass, bending reality itself. And in the center of that distortion was a hollow silhouette, a void, perfectly circular, mirroring the same geometric lattice that had once appeared after the first object disappeared. It was as if the two were connected, an arrival following a signal left behind. Dr. Lena Voss, now working in secrecy, gave a haunting explanation. If the first one sent a map, she said, then this one is following it home. Her words spread across encrypted networks and hidden channels, and for the first time, humanity understood what they were seeing. Not random visitors, but a pattern, a chain. Something was being built, piece by piece, across the solar system. The final observation came from an orbital telescope near Mars. For 3 nights in a row, it recorded something faint surrounding 3I Atlas b, a ring of particulate light. Dust, maybe. Debris. But when analyzed, the particles weren't natural. They were metallic, and they were aligning, slowly, precisely, forming a halo around the object. A structure. Not random, not chaotic, intentional. Then suddenly, the pulses stopped. The rhythm went quiet. The object no longer emitted heat. No radio waves. No sound. It just hovered, motionless, as if waiting for something. The last signal received from it contained only one sequence, a repeat of the coordinates from Chapter 10, Earth's position. Then, the mirrored path, stretching away into deep space. A reminder, a direction, and a warning. For the first time, the question wasn't what 3 Atlas was. It was when the next one would come. Because if the second had arrived right on schedule, then maybe this wasn't random. Maybe it was a cycle, a countdown. And maybe the first wasn't the beginning. It was just the signal before the others followed.